Good morning, it's Ginny and Tim from Escanaba, Michigan at DS Tech, and we're going to share with you today what compliance is,
Yep.
why it exists, and
And
how do you
how.
comply,
Yeah, the biggest thing is how to comply, right?
right? That's the biggest part because, yeah, there's reasons why you must comply, and there's reasons why you should comply. So we'll dive into that. If you need any help with your compliance at your business, because it can be very confusing, drop comply and I'll get in touch with you. So,
Perfect.
yeah.
So I guess, why does compliance even exist in IT and networking? What is compliance? So what compliance is, it kind of ensures that data security, integrity, and availability across the businesses and industries, helping the organizations protect the consumer data, financial records, intellectual property. So if you're a business and you're collecting customer records, for example, and you're storing it, you have to do a certain level of I guess, due diligence, making sure that that stuff is not being released into the wild or just for anyone to kind of scrape and things like that. So depending on your certain industry, you have different levels of compliance that you have to adhere to. Like a bank or a financial institution's got a higher level of compliance than a tow company, right? It just kind of depends on your business, your use case. But if you're handling any customer records at all, you should at least have some base level of compliance to have. And there's some industry specific compliances that we're used to kind of working with
I
as well.
discovered there's compliance for retailers that take credit card payments
Oh yeah,
too.
because credit card and payments is a whole compliance in and of itself. Just
Y-
having
I
the
didn't know that
ability of that.
existed. So
Yep.
it's like more and more you're being
hmm
forced to comply to,
Basically, they're just rules like laws that you're saying you
yeah,
should do this way because this is the way that makes sense. And if you're not following this way, you can then have fines, fees. We'll get into that about
yeah,
non-compliance, things
yeah.
like that too. So, some of the common compliance frameworks that you may have heard of is like HIPAA, right? People always say that's like medical records, things like that. So that protects your healthcare data, things like
Yep.
that. There's
What does it stand for? Do you know?
Health Insurance Probability and Accountability Act.
I knew you would know.
Or portability, sorry, not
Okay.
probability, but yes.
Portability Act.
Yes.
Okay.
There's the one that you were talking about, the credit card payments. That's the
Yeah.
PCI DSS, Payment Card Industry Data Security Standards. So that secures credit card transactions. So there's certain rules that you need to configure your systems in a certain way that are secure enough that that data won't just leak out, things like that. There's NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is common for like federal agencies. You hear NIST is a very common one. There's a newer one that's kind of making the rounds this year called CMMC, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, which is for DoD contractors. So that is someone, if say you're working with the Army Corps of Engineers and you are dealing with certain blueprints that may be technically like not top secret, but somewhat secret, like maybe you're doing dredging near an Air Force base or something. So the
Mm.
blueprints they give you might technically be. So there's certain things with that a lot more people are going to start to have to adhering to that they weren't enforcing. So that's a big one for those working with the DoD. And there's a couple other ones as well. So basically, it's just a set of rules. Like, here's how you should be configuring your systems. So that way they're hard enough, they're not going to let the data leak. And depending on your use case, your level where you're at, you have different compliance to adhere to. Now, if you don't comply with the compliance, um, that's where then you can kind of run into issues because then if there was ever a security breach or the data or you get ransomware or something got into your systems and it was found that the reason they got in was because you weren't doing the compliance good enough, you could then have fines. You could potentially have lawsuits coming at you, reputational damage, the whole nine yards. It can get real bad if it was if you were following all the compliance to a T and an attack still happened. You're still not going to be in as bad of waters if you didn't follow your compliance at all. You're going to have additional things on top of that. So now, the biggest thing, where I'm going with this compliance is that even if you didn't have to adhere to a compliance standard before, like say you weren't a bank, you weren't working with the government, all that kind of stuff, you're just a regular small business. The problem, or issue now is that your cyber insurance is starting to require a certain level of compliance or standards in order for you to continue to get your cybersecurity insurance. Because it used to be everyone got an insurance policy, but what happened is the insurance companies were losing too much because everyone was getting ransomware and they were making too many payouts compared to what they're taking in. So much like having a good driving record, they want you to have
Yeah.
a good IT record or a good compliance record. So stuff like having MFA enabled for all users, um, having endpoint protection, backup, some of the common things that you should be having no matter what, even if you weren't in a compliance industry, they're kind of requiring that now too. So if you're having issues with your cyber insurance, it seems like it's a whole thing. Again, drop that in the comments as well too. And we can help you with your insurance renewals as well with the compliance. So And then the other big thing to know with compliance is it used to be kind of like on a quarterly basis or a yearly basis where you'd have an auditor or someone would review everything, see where you're at, kind of make sure you're checking all the boxes. And then if you're not, come up with a plan in order to correct all of that. The problem with that is the things are evolving so fast now with technology and AI and all this stuff that in order to do it even just once every quarter, it's too slow and laggy. So what most people do is they call it continuous vulnerability management or continuous compliance management. And we'll have a whole episode dedicated to that and reasons for that, but that's where most of the industry is trending towards. And so you're doing it weekly, monthly, every day, even depending on your use case, and constantly keeping up with things so you're not falling too far behind.
Shoo,
Yeah.
that's a lot.
And then a lot of times too with businesses is you must have to ensure that your vendors and partners are meeting the same security standards. This is for like CMMC, where if you're working with the department and you have a contractor under,
CMMC?
yep, the CMMC, that's the
What's
one
that?
that's for the, if you're working with the DoD, the
Oh,
defense
that one.
contractors.
Okay.
Yep. So say you're a contractor, you're working on some with the Army Corps of Engineers doing a break wall, doing whatever you're doing, right? The thing with that is now not only you need to be CMMC compliant, but they're going to make sure that if you are hiring a subcontractor,
Oh, that they have
that
to
they
be.
have to also be compliant because they could be also viewing the plans and the data and things like that. Anyone that has access to the sensitive data has to be compliant. So that's kind of more of a thing that they're pushing this
I
year.
wonder if that applies to us and our vendors.
That's a whole can of worms where basically they're starting to say MSPs. If you have one CMMC client, you have to be CMMC certified yourself, but there's a way
Oh,
of segmentating
interesting.
yourself. It's still kind of like fluid where like if you technically don't have access to any of the systems, they are still holding the keys. You can decouple yourself from that a little bit. But if you as an MSP have access to the systems that have access to that data, you also have to have the same security compliance
Gotcha.
standards because it's just you're accessing the data as well.
Yeah, well, and then I was thinking about our regular vendors too. I mean, I'm sure they're all in compliance
Oh yeah.
because
All of our security vendors, the tools we use, and they're vetted as well
Yeah.
for that. But that's the thing you might run into a problem with. Because the CMMC is a whole thing in itself, but an example is the BDR backup solution we use all the time. It's not technically FedRAMP certified, and you need to be FedRAMP certified to be CMMC 2 level and certain
Oh,
things like that.
interesting.
So certain vendors may not be suitable if you're in that kind of defense kind of security.
Mhm.
That's a real high level of security compliance. Even banks aren't adhering to that. They have their own kind of compliance standards. So but yeah, so
I guess do your due diligence if you're
yeah, if you have any questions about your compliance, whether you're meeting it or not, best thing is to just consult with an expert who lives and breathes compliance, and they can go through everything, because a lot of it isn't just like setting your computer and forgetting it. You actually have to have a policy document that references this is how we handle it, because it could be physical things as well. Like if you get a new hire, what's the vetting process of making sure the new hire is a proper before you give them access? And then when you do give them access, you give them access only on an as needed basis to access the systems that's required for their job, nothing more. There's a whole level of that where you have to have it in writing, matching the actual policy, and you have to prove to the auditors that you're actually following your policies. You can't just like throw it on paper and not actually be following your own rules. So
we've had lots of people reach out to us to help us with those checklists.
Oh yes, because it's overwhelming because you have all this data on one column here and you have to map it to the controls here and then
And
put
all
your
those
evidence.
alphabet
And it looks like it looks like lawyers speak, right? You
Right.
have like section AB.46F matches
Ugh.
this, and it's one of those things where you just, if you live and breathe it every day, it's not too bad. But for someone who you're just trying to manage your business, now you got to try to learn all this stuff too. That's where you're better to outsource it and have someone help you along
drop
with that.
comply.
So,
We can figure it out. If we don't do that particular type of compliance, we do a lot of it,
yep.
right? But if we don't, we know somebody.
Yeah, we have such a big group with
So-
our new charter group that we have, where if we don't have the experts, we'll have nationwide experts to rope in, and we
Yeah.
will definitely be able to help you with whatever compliance needs you have,
Yeah.
for sure. So I guess kind of the final thoughts with this is that compliance is no longer optional. It's becoming required for contracts, partnerships, and insurance, and continuous compliance is the future with real-time monitoring, reporting, and acting day to day, as opposed to just, oh, our audit's coming up in June. Let's make sure we hurry up and get everything fixed in May before the auditor gets
Ugh.
here. Like you can't, that's unfortunately,
hard.
it's too hard to try to catch up at that point now. So
Yeah.
so again, if you have any questions with compliance, or you have a certain compliance framework you want to deep dive into, leave it in the comments. We may be able to do a special episode on that.
Yeah.
One thing to keep in mind is if you were in the medical field, HIPAA is actually making a bunch of changes this year to their compliance, making it more strict. So I'm going to do a little bit of research, get my facts all in a bubble, and then we will for sure make sure we have a dedicated episode just on the HIPAA
Just on
changes,
HIPAA?
because
Okay.
that's one that does affect a lot of our clients. So it would be good to just go over the changes, and then if you wanted to go into deep dive, just reach out. So
Yeah, absolutely. Drop your comments and questions and we'll be in touch. See you next time. Make it a great day.